Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Hard Light Network. Alright, guys, because it's June, the topic of today is So, I'm browsing through Steam the other day when I find myself browsing through the curators tabs. For those of you who don't know, curators are Steam users who spend their time writing reviews for different games throughout the library. There are several massive curators with tens of thousands of followers whose reviews are pretty helpful when it comes to finding a game that might be similar to your current interests. Several of these larger curators take a more journalistic approach to their reviews. But there are a lot of silly gag curators out there that add an interesting and funny element to the reviews as well. That being said, like the title of this video might suggest, I actually came across a curator by the title of LGBTQ+ representation in gaming. You know, my first reaction when I saw this was actually to think about all of the drama recently with Sweet Baby Inc. and the quote-unquote woke influence on the video game industry. So naturally, I was just going to point and laugh and continue with my day, but then I decided to actually look at the reviews and see how they arrived at the conclusions that they did. As an avid gamer myself, I wanted to see if maybe the LGBTQ+ representation metric is actually a solid means for picking out good games or not. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Alright, if we look over here at the sidebar, we can get a little bit more information about this curator's reviews, and it looks like they've only done about 169 reviews.
Nice.
If you look on the left here, you can see that they break up their categories into recommended, informational, and not recommended respectfully. I think the informational category is actually meant to be a stand-in for neutral, but it's kind of hard to tell what criteria they're using to rate these games on. Our first example here is actually Stellaris, which is kind of a weird game for them to review based on the LGBTQ criteria. They rated it as informational and cited that there is minimal gender and orientation mention. And the only reason I'm focusing on this as being odd is because other games that they rated as not recommended also have this exact same criteria mentioned. Next, we see that Crusader Kings 2 is not recommended because it is impossible for gay marriage without mods. However, Crusader Kings 3 is actually recommended not only because your rulers can be gay, but because it's also possible to pass pro-gay legislation. Up next, they review about 4 visual novels in a row, and if I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, I think visual novels are kind of gay. So what I can gather from these reviews is that this curator seems to be focusing exclusively on the visual public representation of the LGBTQ aspects of these games. It doesn't seem to be like a gameplay or an actual like technical sort of review. It seems like if the game represents the community in a positive light, then it's going to get a positive recommendation, which kind of begs the question as to why. For example, I remember during Far Cry 4's development that there was some controversy in the community surrounding the character of Pagan Min and his sexuality. So I guess the question is, why must every representation be positive or idealized in order for it to be a good game and get a positive recommendation? Next up on the rainbow color chopping block is the Metal Gear Solid series, which I think is actually pretty funny, seeing as how it's rated as informational. On the one hand, it's got a quote positive MLM representation, but on the other hand, it takes a ding due to its treatment of women. Overall, it's a quote unquote mixed bag. This series of reviews actually demonstrates a bit of a double standard on the part of our curator though. And look, before anyone gets upset with me, if they were applying the sort of LGBTQ+ representation metric consistently, I wouldn't say anything about it, but they aren't. And in my mind at least, this review creates a sort of gay good, straight bad dichotomy. What's weird is I don't really get what it means by its quote treatment of women. From my experience of the series, all of the female characters in game are dynamic, multifaceted, and interesting. It's also one of the only game series that I've ever played that has included unconventional sexual themes in a mature way without making it a central part of the plot. It's also interesting to me that a couple of tender kisses from Ocelot after a few rounds of shocking ball torture is what constitutes a great example of MLM representation. While Snake doing a little bit of a wooga maxing to the pinup girl poster is tantamount to a war crime against women. It's just odd to me that the traditionally heterosexual elements of this game are enough to push this curator away from a series that is otherwise positive towards the LGBTQ community. Next up, we have Ghost of Tsushima that has received a negative recommendation because, quote, the only LGBTQ plus representation comes in the form of characters cheating on their spouses or a pedophile. This ties back into my earlier question of why representation has to be positive in order for a game to be received as good. Why is it seen as some sort of indictment against the LGBTQ community if a game has a gay villain?
Hey, you're not bad looking either. Get out. Yeah, you got a real pretty mouth.
You can take it or leave it, but I prefer that my characters in my TV, video games, comic books have different motivations and come from all sorts of different walks of life. It makes for an interesting and compelling and realistic narrative. For this next section, I'm going to outline that weird and inconsistent application of their rating metric. The game Sippy Disco is given an informational rating and is only included in the review seemingly because it has a queer developer. This reads purely as an in-group endorsement. The game doesn't really have any themes, it isn't really relevant to the topic matter, but it has a queer developer, so we're going to give it an informational rating and steer people towards it. Last Epoch is given a negative recommendation, even though it is a top-down hack-and-slash RPG, where there is no reason to tell me why my character can't be gay or not. Does the lack of LGBTQ themes make it a bad game, or does it simply just lack LGBTQ themes? Our next positive recommendation comes with Death of a Wish, which is recommended for its features of orientation and gender representation, with heavy themes of quote-unquote religious trauma among the LGBTQ folk. And I'm not gonna lie guys, from the art and the preview images, it actually does look pretty sick. Like I said, there are games where these themes can be explored in a mature way that does add value to the narrative. This one's kind of a weird nitpick for me and seems to be like a sort of contrarian, sort of like bandwagon take. I mean, it seems like they're just hating on Helldivers 2. I really don't understand what the problem is with the representation when you can have like traditionally male body with a feminine voice or like vice versa or whatever with your character. And then for them to call it a single player game and criticize the anti-cheat is like very weird considering they haven't criticized any technical elements of any other game up to this point. And then it's the same thing with Pal World. Like they say AI art and pointless edge. What is this criticism? This has nothing to do with the representation, and you can have person-to-person interaction, so there's no reason why you can't be gay and play this. This right here is a weird example. What is this? Warhammer as a series has not done a good job with representation and has an overwhelmingly bigoted fan base. It's odd to judge a game or really any work of art based on who likes it. I mean, God forbid we have something in common with straight white males. What is this? Gears of War 5 is considered informational because there's representation, but not enough of it. You can self-identify in multiplayer through flag customization options, but there's no plot-relevant details about it, so it's not enough to earn it a recommendation. This is just an odd litmus test where there are apparently levels of support, where some games don't support or represent enough to earn a recommendation. And this really serves as the nail in the coffin for my point here. Here there are 3 different games with 3 different recommendations based on the same criteria. What sets Call of Duty and Lies of P apart from Lethal Company? It can't be the representation, so what is it? Why is Lethal Company informational, but Call of Duty and Lies of P are not recommended? To be honest guys, I don't want anyone to take this video too seriously. It was really meant as a more lighthearted romp through this more politically charged territory surrounding games and gaming content. When it comes to games, for me, representation of any kind isn't really what makes or breaks the game for me. I'm much more focused on gameplay, story, and overall cohesion. If the game is fun to play, if its mechanics are easy to pick up and hard to master, if the story is compelling, then I'm probably going to keep playing it and I'm probably going to recommend it to my friends. And in my humble opinion, I don't think it does any game a good service to funnel it through such a narrow worldview when reviewing it. Games are inherently complex, and there are many factors that can turn a good game into a great game and a bad game into a terrible game. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. I appreciate you very much for sticking through to the entire video. If you liked it, please leave a like and let me know what you think in the comments, guys. How do you feel about this entire conversation in general? Are you pro LGBT representation in games? Are you anti? Are you pretty much sick and tired of people focusing on it and arguing so much about it? Please let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you have any examples of banger, absolutely must-play games, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Until next time, love you guys. Safe travels. What's this? Baldur's Gate 3 has a positive recommendation? Yeah, I bet. Yeah, we know why Baldur's Gate 3's got the positive. We know, guys, right?